They called me the Iron Emperor of Soul because nothing could hurt me and nothing could move me. For 9 years, my body was a graveyard, cold, dead, and useless. But the moment that terrified little bird crashed into my chest on the number 2 line, the graveyard didn't just wake up. It caught fire. The rain and soul didn't wash the city clean. It just made the neon lights bleed onto the asphalt. Han Young-soo stood on the platform of Gangnam Station, his bespoke Italian suit soaking up the damp chill. He shouldn't be here. Men like him, men who owned half the shipping containers in Incheon and 3/4 of the politicians in Gangbuk, didn't take the subway. They took armored convoys. But tonight, Young-soo needed to feel the vibration of the tracks. He needed to be surrounded by noise because the silence in his penthouse and the silence in his own body was becoming deafening. At 34, Young-soo was a ghost in a god's body. 9 years ago, a rival syndicate's knife had severed a nerve near his spine during a botched assassination attempt. He had walked again, fought again, and killed again. But he hadn't felt a woman since. No heat. No desire. Just a cold, humiliating numbness that had turned him into a monk of violence. He had accepted it. He was a weapon, not a man. Attention passengers, the train approaching is... As the crowd surged forward, a flash of color caught his eye. Rose was running. She was late for her 3rd shift at the convenience store, and her landlord had already threatened to change the code on her door if she didn't pay up by Friday. Being a black woman in Korea was usually a lesson in hypervisibility. People stared, but today she felt invisible in the worst way. She was just an obstacle people shoved past. She was 23, tired, and soaked to the bone because she'd forgotten her umbrella. She squeezed through the closing doors of the train, breathless, her chest heaving. The car was packed tight, a can of sardines smelling of wet wool and exhaustion. Young-soo stood in the corner, his aura so terrifyingly cold that a small circle of empty space had formed around him despite the crowd. He stared at his reflection in the dark window. Dead eyes. Then the train jerked. Hard. The emergency brakes screeched. Bodies flew forward. Rose lost her grip on the handrail. She stumbled, her feet tangling, and she was thrown backward with violent force. She didn't hit the floor. She hit a wall of muscle and expensive fabric. She landed hard against Young-soo, her back pressed flush against his chest, her hips grinding inadvertently into his groin as she tried to find her footing. Before we see his reaction, have you ever met someone who changed your life in a single second? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more dark romance tales. The train stabilized with a mechanical hiss, but time inside the car seemed to freeze. Rose gasped, her hands clutching the, stranger's forearms to steady herself. Beneath the damp wool of his coat, his muscles were rigid as steel. I'm so sorry, she stammered in broken Korean, trying to pull away. But his hands clamped onto her hips, not to push her away, to hold her in place. For Young-soo, the universe had narrowed down to the friction between her lower back and his groin. It wasn't just a twitch, it was a violent, searing rush of blood. A resurrection. The ice that had encased his lower body for 9 years shattered instantly, replaced by a throbbing, painful hardness that he had forgotten existed. Alive. I am alive. The sensation was electric, traveling up his spine and exploding in his brain. It terrified him more than any bullet ever had. Rose felt it too. The undeniable hard ridge pressing against her through her damp jeans. Her eyes widened in panic. She twisted her head to look up at him, expecting a pervert taking advantage of the crowd. Instead, she found a predator. His face was sharp, handsome, and terrifying. His eyes were pitch black, dilated, staring down at her not with simple lust, but with the desperate intensity of a starving man finding bread in a desert. He smelled of cold rain, gunpowder, and expensive cologne. She smelled of vanilla and fear. "Sir, please," she whispered in English, too frightened to remember her Korean. "Let me go." Young-soo didn't understand the words, but he understood the tremble in her body. His grip tightened for a split second, his leather gloves creaking against her waist. He leaned down, his lips brushing the shell of her ear, hidden by the noise of the commuters straightening themselves out. "Don't move," he rasped, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her chest. "If you move, it stops." He closed his eyes, inhaling the scent of her hair. It was madness, a random foreigner, a crowded train. And yet, his body, which had refused the most beautiful models and heiresses in Seoul, was reacting to her like she was the only woman on earth. The doors hissed open at the next stop. The spell broke. Rose shoved him with all her might, breaking his grip. She stumbled out the door, nearly tripping over the platform gap, and bolted into the station, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Young-soo stood alone in the small clearing she had left behind. He looked down at himself, then at the closing doors. He felt the ache beginning to fade, the cold returning. Panic surged in his chest. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone with shaking hands. "Find her," he commanded into the receiver, his eyes fixed on the yellow scarf disappearing into the crowd. "The foreign girl at Yuksum Station. Find her now or heads will roll." 3 hours later, Rose sat on the floor of her rooftop semi-basement apartment, her knees pulled to her chest. The room was freezing, she was saving on heating bills, but her skin was burning. She scrubbed her hands over her arms, trying to wipe away the sensation of that man's leather gloves. It didn't work. "It was just a creep," she whispered to the damp walls, "just a businessman on a power trip." But she was lying to herself. She had felt the ridge of him against her back, yes, but she had also felt his shaking. The way he had inhaled her scent wasn't an act of dominance, it was an act of drowning. It haunted her. Her phone buzzed on the floorboard. A text from her landlord. "Rent is 2 weeks late. You have 24 hours or I call immigration." Rose dropped her head into her hands. The fear of the man on the train evaporated, replaced by the crushing weight of poverty. She was a student on a visa that didn't allow her to work enough hours to survive. She was trapped. Across the city, in the penthouse of the Lotus Tower, Young-soo shattered a crystal glass against the wall. "Nothing!" he roared, his voice cracking with rage. A trembling woman, a high-end escort hired by his lieutenant, scrambled out of the room, clutching her silk robe. Young-soo stood by the window, breathing hard, his chest heaving. He looked down at his body with hatred. It had gone back to sleep. The moment Rose had left the train, the fire had died. He had tried to recreate it with the most beautiful woman money could buy, but there was nothing. Just the same cold, dead silence that had plagued him for 9 years. "It wasn't a fluke," he muttered, realization settling over him like a heavy coat. It was her. His second-in-command, Director Kang, stepped into the room silently, holding a tablet. "Boss, we found her. Her name is Rosa Mani, student at Yonsei University. She works illegal part-time shifts at a convenience store in Mapo-gu." Young-soo took the tablet. He stared at the grainy ID photo of the girl with the braids and the wide, terrified eyes. "She has debt?" Young-soo asked, his thumb tracing her face on the screen. "Significant debt. And visa issues." Young-soo's lips curled into a dark, predatory smile. The anger faded, replaced by a chilling calm. He didn't believe in fate. He believed in leverage. "Buy the building she lives in," Young-soo said softly, "and buy her debt. Every one of it." "Sir?" "I don't want to date her, Kang. I need to own her. Rose didn't walk into the Lotus Tower. She was marched in. Two men in black suits had intercepted her outside the convenience store, flashing a promissory note with her signature on it. The debt has been transferred, they had said. The new owner wants to negotiate. Now, standing in a penthouse office that looked more like a museum of shadows than a workspace, Rose felt small. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Seoul, a city that suddenly felt like a can't be set. The voice came from the high-backed leather chair facing the window. The chair swiveled slowly. Rose gasped. It was him. The man from the train. Young-soo didn't stand up. He sat perfectly still, his fingers steepled, watching her with those terrifying, dead black eyes. You? Rose breathed, her hands balling into fists at her sides. You bought my debt? Why? Because I bumped into you? Because you have something I need, Young-soo said, his voice smooth and devoid of emotion. He slid a folder across the obsidian desk. 70 million won. That's your debt, plus interest. Plus the plane ticket home that immigration is preparing for you. Rose felt the blood drain from her face. I can't go back, not yet. I know. Young-soo stood up. He moved around the desk with the grace of a panther stalking prey. So, here is the offer. You will live here. You will work as my live-in personal assistant. You will be available 24 hours a day. In exchange, the debt is frozen. The visa is fixed. What kind of assistant? Rose asked, her voice trembling. She knew what men like him usually wanted. Young-soo stopped inches from her. The air between them grew heavy, charged with static. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached out, his hand hovering over hers. He needed to know. Was it a fluke? His fingers brushed against her knuckles. Boom! The reaction was violent. His heart slammed against his ribs. The blood rushed south with a painful, exquisite intensity. He let out a shaky breath, his eyes fluttering shut for a fraction of a second. It was real. She was the key. He opened his eyes, now burning with a possessive fire that made Rose take a step back. You don't need to worry about that, Young-soo lied, his voice rougher now. Your job is simple, you just have to be near me, always. And if I refuse? Then you are on a plane tonight, and your family in Africa gets the bill. Rose looked at the contract, then at the man who looked at her as if she were oxygen. She picked up the pen. She had no choice. He's forcing her to stay, but his body is betraying him. Do you think love can ever grow from a contract made in desperation? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. 2 weeks into her imprisonment, Rose realized that the Lotus Tower was not a fortress. It was a mausoleum. She heard the scream at 3 o'clock a.m. It was raw, guttural, the sound of an animal caught in a trap. Rose rushed out of her guest room, barefoot, following the sound to the master bedroom. The door was ajar. Inside, the air was freezing. He kept the AC on full blast, as if trying to freeze his own demons. Young-soo was thrashing in the tangled silk sheets, sweat glistening on his skin. He was shirtless. Rose froze. A jagged purple scar ran from his lower lumbar spine all the way to his hip bone. It wasn't a surgical scar. It was the mark of a blade that had been twisted. It looked angry, even 9 years later. No, no, he moaned, his hand clawing at the empty air. Rose moved before she could think. Her instinct as a caretaker, the part of her that had looked after her younger siblings in Ghana, took over. She sat on the edge of the bed and reached out, placing her cool hand on his burning shoulder. Young-soo, she whispered, using his name for the first time. Wake up. You're safe. Young-soo gasped, his eyes flying open. He didn't see Rose. He saw the assassins from that night in the warehouse. He grabbed her wrist, twisting it violently, pinning her to the mattress in a blur of motion. Who sent you? He snarled, hovering over her, his breathing ragged. It's me, Rose said, wincing but not looking away. She stared right into his terrified, furious eyes. It's just Rose, you were dreaming. Young-soo blinked. The fog of the nightmare cleared. He realized where he was. He realized he was pinning his assistant to the bed. And then he realized something else. Her skin against his chest. Her scent filling his lungs. The pain in his back. The phantom nerve pain that plagued him every night. Vanished. It was replaced by that heavy, undeniable heat. He was hard. Instantly. Painfully. He rolled off her, scrambling to the edge of the bed, turning his back to hide his reaction. He covered his face with his hands. Get out, he rasped. You shouldn't see me like this. Weak. I don't see weakness, Rose said softly, sitting up. She didn't leave. She reached out and touched the center of the scar on his back. He flinched, but he didn't pull away. A knife, he confessed, his voice hollow. 9 years ago. It took everything from me. My ability to walk for a year, and my ability to be a man forever. Not forever, Rose whispered, her hand still on his skin. Young-soo turned his head, looking at her over his shoulder. For the first time, the predator was gone. There was only a man looking at the woman who held the cure to his soul in her hands. The Lotus Tower smelled different. The antiseptic scent of luxury had been replaced by the rich, smoky aroma of spices, thyme, curry powder, and Scotch bonnet peppers. Rose stood in the sleek, million-dollar kitchen that had never been used, stirring a large pot of jollof rice. She hummed a song from her childhood, her hips swaying slightly. You are trying to burn my tongue off? Rose jumped and spun around. Young-soo was leaning against the doorframe. He wasn't wearing his armor, the suit. He wore a simple gray cashmere sweater and sweatpants. He looked younger, softer. It's just a little heat, Rose teased, holding up a wooden spoon. I thought Korean men were tough. Can't handle a little African spice? Young-soo smirked. It was a genuine expression, reaching his eyes, making the crinkles at the corners deepen. I eat jagged glass for breakfast, Rose. Your rice doesn't scare me. They ate on the balcony, sitting on the floor cushions, the city lights of Seoul twinkling below them like a reflection of the stars. For the first time in years, Young-soo wasn't thinking about territory, shipments, or enemies. He was watching the way Rose chewed her lip when she laughed. It's good, he admitted, wiping his mouth. It tastes like home, even though I've never been there. That's the secret. Ingredient, Rose said softly, looking out at the skyline. Love. My mother taught me that food without love is just fuel. Young-soo went quiet. He looked at her profile, the curve of her nose, the glow of her skin in the moonlight. The ache in his body was there, a low, steady hum of desire that he had learned to welcome. But tonight, something else was stronger. He reached out, not to grab, but to tuck a loose braid behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her cheek. I have lived on fuel for a long time, he whispered. I forgot what it was like to be full. Rose turned into his touch, her eyes closing. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore, it was golden. For an hour, the contract didn't exist. The debt didn't exist. It was just a man and a woman, finding warmth in a cold world. But as Young-soo leaned in, his phone buzzed violently on the floor. A red light blinking. The signal for a level 1 threat. The moment shattered. The piece of the balcony didn't last. The heavy oak doors of the penthouse were blasted off their hinges. Men in dark suits poured in, not police, but soldiers of the Viper clan. Young-soo moved faster than humanly possible. He shoved Rose behind a marble pillar, pulled a gun from a hidden holster under the table, and fired. 3 shots, 3 bodies hitting the floor. Rose covered her ears, screaming, curled into a ball. The smell of gunpowder choked the scent of the jollof rice. The man who had just gently tucked her hair back was gone. In his place was the Iron Emperor, a machine of death with cold, dead eyes. Silence fell as the last intruder dropped, but then a slow clap echoed from the doorway. Director Choi, Young-Soo's oldest rival, stepped over the bodies. He wasn't armed. He was holding a manila folder. "Impressive, Young-Soo," Choi sneered. "You killed my men to protect your medicine." Young-Soo raised the gun to Choi's head. "Get out, or you join them." "I'm just here to deliver the mail." Choi tossed the folder onto the floor near Rose. It slid open, spilling photos. Photos of Rose on the subway. Photos of her at the store. And a medical chart titled, "Subject, Stimulus Response and Potency Recovery." Rose's trembling hands picked up the paper. It was a log. Day 1, accidental contact, immediate arousal. Day 5, proximity test successful. Subject is the only known cure for impotency. The world spun. Rose looked up, tears streaming down her face. "A subject? I was just a pill to you?" Young-Soo lowered the gun, his face pale. "Rose, listen. Did you buy me because you wanted me?" she screamed, her voice cracking. "Or because I made you work again?" Young-Soo looked at Choi, then at the gunmen gathering in the hallway. He knew the truth. As long as Rose was his weakness, she would be hunted. Choi knew. Everyone would know. To save her, he had to destroy her. His face hardened into a mask of ice. The lie tasted like ash in his mouth. "You are right," Young-Soo said, his voice devoid of humanity. "I needed to test if I was cured. You were a convenient tool, but the experiment is over." He turned his back on her. "Take the money I gave you and get out of my sight." Rose stood there, her heart shattering into a million pieces. She didn't see the way Young-Soo's hands were shaking at his sides. She only saw the monster. "I hate you," she whispered. She turned and ran into the elevator, taking the last of his humanity with her. The silence in the Lotus Tower was louder than the gunshots had been. Young-Soo sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his hands. They were steady now, but they were cold. The warmth Rose had brought, the fire that had coursed through his veins for the first time in a decade, was gone. He had protected her. He had saved her life by breaking her heart. That was what kings did. They sacrificed pieces on the board to save the kingdom. So why does it feel like I just died? He looked at the pot of cold jollof rice still sitting on the stove. It was the only color in his monochrome world. "I am not a king," he whispered to the empty room. "I am just a ghost haunting my own house." At Incheon International Airport, Rose sat at gate 24, staring at the departure screen. Seoul to Accra. Boarding in 20 minutes. She held the plane ticket in one hand and her passport in the other. Her chest ached with a physical weight. She should be relieved. She was escaping a monster. She was going home to safety. But when she closed her eyes, she didn't see the monster with the gun. She saw the broken man trembling in the dark, terrified of his own nightmares. She felt the way he had leaned into her hand, starving for a touch that wasn't violent. Was it all a lie? Her mind said yes. Her heart, traitorous and stubborn, said no. Back in the tower, Young-Soo stood up. The choice hit him with the force of a freight train. He had spent 9 years protecting his body, his reputation, and his empire. But without her, the empire was just a pile of dust. He didn't want his manhood to work for the sake of pride. He wanted it to work for her. He grabbed his coat. He didn't call his guards. He didn't call his driver. For the first time in his life, Han Young-soo didn't care about safety. He sprinted to the elevator, jamming the button. "Don't get on that plane, Rose." He peeled out of the garage in his black sports car, tires screaming against the concrete, tearing onto the highway toward Incheon. He was driving like a madman, weaving through traffic, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. It wasn't about the cure anymore, it was about the woman. Final boarding call for Flight 702 to Accra. Rose stood up, her bag heavy on her shoulder, her heart heavy in her chest. She handed her ticket to the attendant, but just as the scanner beeped, a commotion erupted behind her. Security guards were shouting, a man was sprinting through the terminal, hurdling a velvet rope, his coat flying behind him like a broken wing. "Rose, His voice wasn't the cold growl of the Iron Emperor. It was desperate. Human. Rose froze. She turned around just as Young-soo skid to a halt, chest heaving, sweat dripping down his temple. He looked nothing like the untouchable Mafia Boss. He looked like a man who had run through hell. "Don't," he gasped, ignoring the security guards closing in. "Don't get on that plane." "Give me one reason," Rose said, her voice trembling. "And don't lie to me, Young-soo." Young-soo stepped past the barrier. He dropped to his knees, right there on the dirty airport carpet in front of hundreds of strangers. The Iron Emperor, who never bowed to anyone, bowed to her. "Because I lied," he said, looking up at her with raw, unguarded eyes. "I told you that you were just medicine. But medicine fixes a sickness. You didn't just fix my body, Rose. You woke up my soul." He reached out a hand, palm up, shaking. "I don't want the Empire if you aren't the Queen. I don't want to feel anything if I can't feel you." Rose looked at the man who had terrified her on the train, the man who had saved her, the man who had broken her heart to save her life. She dropped her bag. She took a step forward and placed her hand in his. The spark. It hit them both, but this time, it wasn't just the sharp electric shock of physical arousal. It was warmer, deeper. It wasn't a reaction to a stimulus. It was the feeling of two broken halves finally clicking together. Young-soo let out a shuddering breath, burying his face in her palm, kissing her lifeline. He stood up, pulling her into his arms, not as a possession, but as his equal. "I felt something," he whispered against her lips, echoing the thought he'd had that first day on the subway. "I finally felt love." He kissed her, and for the first time in 9 years, the winter in his heart ended. The Iron Emperor was dead. Long live the man. Love really is the only force powerful enough to heal the deepest wounds. Do you think Young-soo deserves his second chance? If you love this story, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a heartbeat of our next dark romance.